We got to kind of bring it up a little bit, the whole article and everything. I mean, Jerry, I mean, even in the first couple of seasons of Seinfeld, the city was in bad shape, and it was, robbery, the subway episode. Jerry has a joke from the '70s in his book, and that he did about going through the South Bronx and you scream at the flat part of the roller coaster. So he knows a city can be bad, right? And so, the comeback that it's going to make, and I agree with him, there will be a comeback, but I also agree with you that what that comeback looks like is what no one's really talking about. So I'm just curious, like, what the comeback looks like to you in your world of, owning the comedy club and dealing with comics and live performances and shooting television shows in the city. Like, what is the comeback going to look like? Because it will come back, but it's not going to come back the way it was, right? It's going to be different. So what is that? How do you foresee it in some way, maybe?
Well, guys, I've just run out of time, so this is great. It's a good question, because this was the problem I had writing that article, which is that, by the way, I was in New York the entire time, the whole lockdown, everything. The protests are still ongoing, but at least the initial part of that. And so I kept seeing more and more. And I'm an optimistic guy. I think one of the things that disturbed a lot of my friends about my article, and which kind of set the initial spread of the article, was that this is almost the first time I had written something like this without seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, without being optimistic somehow and giving hope. But I was looking at all these things. Like, every day I'd take a walk in another store that wasn't boarded up anymore. It was for lease. Another restaurant, another store, or just I was trying to just pick up things here and there that seemed not just mildly off, but very off, where even if the lockdown had stopped right then, what does the future look like 1 year, 2 years, 5 years out? And then I would talk to people like city officials or, congressmen or even federal administration officials. I talked to so many people, and I'm like, well, what do you think of this? And I would give them, all these pizza restaurants are out of business on my block, for instance. And they said, well, less competition then, so restaurant owners are going to want to come in. And I'm like, that's not how the restaurant business works. Like who is going to wake up today and say, finally, my dream of starting a pizza restaurant in New York, I could do it today because every other pizza restaurant just went out of business. Like, business people don't think like that. And the great thing about, I'm diving for a second into the restaurant industry, but the great thing about the restaurant industry is that you want competition. There are streets like Restaurant Row, 47th Street or 48th Street on the west side, that is all restaurants, because you want to go to a restaurant area and then you pick which restaurant you're going to go to. That's how consumers behave. So if there's no competition, people won't go out anymore. They won't know where to go. And
and I don't think Jerry understands the bridge and tunnel and the efficiencies companies are having from remote, which you touch on. So that's another thing.
Right. And so then, so I started seeing all these things, like all the office buildings, nobody was there. People had moved. They hadn't, all the U-Hauls had moved out. People were moving to Phoenix. They were moving to Miami. They were moving to Denver. They were moving to Austin, like they were buying places in other places. And I said, why are you moving? What happens when this is over? Oh, my company told me to move. They're never coming back to the office. And so I'm like, okay, well, why is this happening? And I remember talking to one of my editors for something I'm working on, and she was like, nobody needs to go back to the office. We're more productive doing this remote. It's a lot more fun. I'm spending time with my kids. I'm in the outdoors, and I see my friends here whenever I want, and I'm more productive. And so then I started looking into the statistics. Well, there's a lot of research, even before this pandemic and during this pandemic, about how much more productive people are when they work remote and how much money is being saved by big companies when they're remote. And, and so Seinfeld, in his article, I'll mention one thing he said. He specifically says, everybody so he's talking about remote when he says this. Everybody hates this. Everybody, period, hates this. And he's referring to remote work. It's just not true.
No.
Every single study ever done, I looked at,
not true.
Stanford, Harvard, IBM did a study, other companies did studies. 100% of the studies showed that anywhere from 60 to 90% of people love working remote. Like every studies of 20,000 people, significantly more than half love working remote. Okay, well, productivity. Don't you have to be in the office to be productive? No. Study after study, you're more productive working remote. Not at every business, but at a lot of, on average. This one study I'm thinking of, done at Harvard or whatever, 2,500 random workers, some remote, some not, more productive. The U.S. Patent Office did a study. Some patent examiners worked in the office, some worked at home. The ones working at home, something like 13% more effective. On and on and on. And so people like working remote. They're more productive working remote. Companies can reduce costs significantly. I mean, Manhattan rent's expensive, so you reduce extensive costs. And then there's this other unknown new factor, which is that they don't want somebody coming into work and getting coronavirus and suing them. So liability is an unknown issue, even as we're speaking. Nobody knows what the story is on the legal ramifications of non-remote work. And on top of that now, remote work is possible. It wasn't possible in the 70s. It wasn't possible in 2001. It wasn't possible in 2008. Bandwidth is 10 times faster than it was in 2008, 2009. So remote work for the first time is actually possible. It never was possible before. Then he's talking about grit. I was there in the 70s. I was in the World Trade Center. Everybody who's trashed me in the past 2.5 months, I was in the World Trade Center on 9/11. So fuck you. I lived right there. I rebuilt downtown, or was involved in it. I lived on Wall Street in 2008. So I saw it. Like, I've seen all the things everybody's referring to, and it was painful. I went broke during these periods. It was sucked. And this is different right now. It's just different. I'm not like, and I haven't been abandoning ship since I wrote the article. I've talked to different borough presidents who are running for mayor. I've talked to the Federal Reserve people about do they ever bail out cities? Like, I just wanted to figure out the range of solutions. So all of this is to say, I appreciate Seinfeld's love for the city. I even wrote in a later article, we're on the same side. I love the city as well. I say that in the article. I don't want it to be dead. But I think this is not an expert. Nobody's an expert at this, but this was Seinfeld's first opinion piece in his life. Like, he had never organized his thoughts in a way that expresses an opinion. And you could tell, because the only thing he really does is what's called an ad hominem attack. Rather than answer the issues, he just insults me. And he's like, oh, this guy he's going to miss his Broadway shows. No, I hate Broadway. I will never, ever go to another Broadway show. I went to The Lion King to take my stupid kids to it, and I'm never going to go again. But what happens when Broadway is shut down until mid-next year? 1,000 restaurants close, 100 hotels close, another 200,000 people will go unemployed, another bunch of union members who are stagehands and so on and work in the Broadway ecosystem are out of work. Investors lose their money and then aren't encouraged to invest in future productions. Tourism goes down, which means billions in sales taxes away from New York. New York City has to have a way to pay for teachers, garbage collectors, EMT workers, healthcare workers, police, transit workers. New York City has to generate money from someplace, and if the top wealthy people leave, which 1,000 people a week now are leaving, and if 80,000 restaurants and stores go out of business and tourism drops by half, how are you going to have the money to pay for these things? Which then continues the cycle of, okay, New York City's less habitable and fewer businesses move there, and on and on and on. It becomes this death cycle. So I don't know. That's why I didn't necessarily have solutions. I felt everybody was in denial, which turned out I was correct in a very painful way. People like Jerry were saying, hey, grit, New York always survives. Everybody should have grit. Well, grit doesn't fill a $100 billion hole. That's the problem. Yeah. And then people say, well, in 10 years it'll come back. 10 years is a really long time to the garbage collector who just got fired yesterday. Like, 10 years, what? Who's predicting 10 years from now? How can you predict 10 years on anything? So no one has a solution. Everyone just says, oh, it's going to magically come back maybe in 10 years, which is like in this impossible far-off future. Like in 2010, would you have expected this pandemic 10 years later? No one could predict 10 years from now.
Well said.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said.
I hope it comes back. I hope that, maybe shit hits the fan and everyone says, oh, rents will go down and there'll be this 70s style utopia again. It wasn't a utopia in the 70s.
Exactly.
I was repeatedly mugged in the 70s and it was not pleasant. And as a kid, I was mugged. And I don't know if rents go down enough. You tell, hey, I called someone the other day and I'm like, oh man, a one bedroom apartment just went from 3,000 to like 1,900 in the Village. And my friend was like, 1,900? Are you kidding me? I'm paying 800 for a 3-bedroom in Phoenix. Why would I do that? So, there's a disconnect between New Yorkers and reality right now, including me. That's why I wanted to write the article, to see if people were aware of what was happening.